I think my earliest memory of a news story was of President Eisenhower. Now, I don't remember it so much as a news story, but I do remember liking the I like Ike buttons, which were everywhere. Someone gave one to me, and I remember wearing it until one of my brothers chastised me for displaying it because he was a Republican. Eisenhower being a Republican, we were Democrats, and we always thought that way. The story that made a deep impression on me was the news coverage of the Vietnam War. I remember the strange thing the Americans did regarding reporting about the body count each day. They not only would put on how many Viet Cong they had killed each day, but it would also line up the bodies in a row. It was sort of a way to show the world who was winning. Looking back, it was very gruesome and politically incorrect, but it was just sort of reflected who was in control in the State Department. It became standard that the war had a section of the news each night, and it truly did bring the war into the living rooms of the American public like no event before it. While it did create a cheering section of the American public, I think it also disturbed some and was also the agent that helped create the anti war movement. Needless to say, since I was growing toward the age when I could be drafted, I joined the latter. It didn't matter because in June of 1970, I was culled from the civilian population and drafted in the second largest draft call of the nation up to that point. I was put into an artillery unit and eventually sent to Germany, so I dodged my worst fears in regards to the war. It was also interesting that by the time I finished basic training, the war had triggered an interest in those who favored it, so that there was no shortage of volunteers. I also thought it ironic that the general in charge of the Vietnam War in its latter phase, General Westmoreland, said later in his retirement that the Vietnam War was a misguided and political mistake by the Americans. So much for 55,000 dead Americans. The other news story that totally captured my attention that I remember following with intense interest was President Nixon's Watergate. I didn't have a TV at the time, so I would go to the local bar and grill to watch the news every night. It did, however, matter who was tending bar because that bar was owned by two guys, Leo and Tony. Leo was a staunch Republican and refused to even turn on the TV because he was a supporter of Nixon. But Tony didn't care and rolled with the punches. If I took a date to the bar and grill on the weekend, Tony would play the bottles for us. It was this thing where he would bang on the bottles of liquor that had varying levels of alcohol in them to some musical piece. It sounded good, especially after you've had a few drinks. I learned real quick with Leo that protesting my rights would get me physically dismissed from the premises. Times were different then, and if I couldn't watch the news, I would go to one of the bars in town where the college kids hung out, and it was too noisy to hear the news anyway, but where you could still get a beer. The strategy of retreating to the college bar had its own short history because I was eventually banned from that bar because of a fight. I guess it proves what's hard to endure is sweet to remember. Early on, I became a news junkie and would always follow the news. In a way, it was cultivating a relationship with the nation. I guess we all shaped that bond in our own way. I did it by following and monitoring the daily news.